Welcome to The Explainer. We're about to squish 4.5 billion years of history, from a flaming rock in space to you, right now, watching this, into just the next few minutes. So get ready, because the story of life, it's your story.
Yeah, let's just start here. To really get how wild this all is, we have to begin with this simple, kinda humbling fact. Everything that's about to follow, all the complexity, all the wonder, it all started right here.
So how did we get from a boring old rock to, well, us? The story kicks off about 4.5 billion years ago, when Earth was just this chaotic, flaming ball of rock. Eventually it cooled down, and water, probably dropped off by comets and asteroids, created massive oceans. And deep down at the bottom of those oceans, these super hot hydrothermal vents started spewing out a rich cocktail of chemicals. This created what scientists call the primordial soup, and it was the perfect kitchen for something amazing to start cooking. And that something amazing was basically just chemistry. I mean, when you get right down to it, biology is just a series of incredibly cool and complex chemical reactions. It all begins with 4 main groups of molecules. You can think of these as the 4 main ingredients in the recipe for everything alive.
First up, we've got carbohydrates. We're talking sugars and starches. They are life's fast fuel. You eat some bread, and boom, your body breaks it down into glucose, which is like a shot of energy your cells can use right now.
Next up are lipids. You probably know them as fats. Now, if carbs are the quick sprint, lipids are the marathon. They're all about storing energy for the long haul. But honestly, their most critical job is forming the protective skin or membrane around every single one of your cells. They're the bouncers at the club door, deciding what gets in and what stays out.
Then we have the proteins, the real workhorses of the cell. I mean, these guys do pretty much everything. They're the bricks that build your muscles, and they're also these tiny machines called enzymes that make chemical reactions happen millions of times faster than they would on their own.
And last but definitely not least, we have nucleic acids. This group includes the most famous molecule of all, DNA. These are the blueprints, the absolute master plan that holds all the instructions for building and running an entire living thing.
So, okay, you take these 4 amazing molecules, you mix them all together in just the right way in that primordial soup, and what do you get? You get the fundamental unit of life itself, the cell. This is the engine, the little self-contained factory where all the magic of being alive happens. And this brings up a huge question. What even is life? It's kind of tricky, and scientists don't have one single perfect definition. But we can see some pretty clear differences. A cat, for instance. It eats, it grows, it makes more cats, and it definitely reacts if you accidentally step on its tail. A rock, well, it does none of that. Anything we call alive shares these basic qualities. Now, not all cells are the same. The first life forms, like bacteria, were prokaryotes. They're super simple, basically just a tiny bag with some DNA floating around inside. But then life got a major upgrade, the eukaryote. These cells are way more complex. They have all these little compartments or organelles doing specific jobs. And most importantly, they keep their precious DNA safe inside a secure vault called the nucleus. You are made of trillions of these fancy eukaryotic cells.
And this brings us to a super important rule for all cells. They have to maintain balance, something called homeostasis. That cell membrane we talked about is always working to keep the inside just right. Here's a real-world example. If you drink a bunch of salt water, the outside of your cells suddenly becomes way saltier than the inside. So, to try and balance things out, the salt water will literally start sucking the water out of your cells, which is why it dehydrates you so badly.
So to power all of this work, from keeping balance to building proteins, cells need energy. And they don't just, burn sugar directly. Instead, they convert the energy from food into a special molecule called ATP. The best way to think about ATP is as the cell's universal rechargeable battery. When the cell needs to do something, it just breaks one of ATP's chemical bonds, gets a burst of energy, and then recharges it to use again later.
But what's conducting this whole orchestra? What tells the cell which proteins to build, or when to use its ATP batteries? Well, that brings us back to the master blueprint for everything, DNA.
So how does a blueprint become an actual building? Well, it's a really cool 2-step process. First, inside that protected nucleus, the cell makes a quick disposable copy of a specific section of DNA. That's a gene. This copy is called mRNA. That process is called transcription. Then, that mRNA message travels out of the nucleus to a little protein-building factory called a ribosome. The ribosome reads the message and builds the protein piece by piece.
That's translation. So you go from DNA to message to machine.
Okay, get ready for this because it's going to blow your mind. If you could take the DNA from just one of your cells, which you can't even see without a microscope, and stretch it all the way out, it would be about 2 meters long. That is an insane amount of information packed into a microscopic space.
So how on earth do you cram all that in there? It's all about some seriously clever packaging. The long DNA strand is wrapped around these little proteins called histones, like thread around a spool. Then those spools are bundled together into something called chromatin, which is then looped and coiled even more tightly until you get those dense X-shaped things we all recognize as chromosomes.
So we've got this incredible code, and it's perfectly packaged. But the real magic is that it can be copied and passed on from one generation to the next. This brings us to genetics, the science of why you have your mom's nose or your dad's weird laugh.
We can even use a simple tool to predict the odds of getting certain traits. See, for every gene, you get 2 versions, called alleles, one from each parent. For eye color, the brown eye allele is dominant, which means it's kind of bossy and overpowers the recessive blue eye allele. So, as you can see here, if you have 2 brown-eyed parents who each secretly carry that blue-eye gene, there's actually a 1 in 4 chance that their kid will get both blue copies and end up with blue eyes.
Your body basically has 2 different copy machines for its cells. For all the everyday stuff, like growing or healing a cut, your body uses mitosis. It's like a perfect photocopier that makes 2 identical cells. But for reproduction, you need to mix things up. That's where meiosis comes in. It shuffles the genetic deck and creates 4 totally unique sperm or egg cells, which is why siblings aren't identical clones.
And this is where everything starts to come together. All those little genetic shuffles for meiosis, plus some random typos or mutations that happen when DNA gets copied, that's the raw material. That is the fuel for the massive engine of evolution.
The main driver here is natural selection. Picture this. A random mutation causes a grasshopper to be born green instead of yellow. Now, if that grasshopper lives in a green grassy field, it's way harder for predators to spot it. That means it's more likely to survive, have babies, and pass on that green gene. Over generations, the whole grasshopper population gets greener. That's natural selection in a nutshell.
And this process, playing out over millions and millions of years, has built systems of breathtaking complexity, like your nervous system. Every single thought you have is basically a tiny electrical storm in your brain. It starts with a nerve cell, a neuron, just resting. Then, a signal comes in and opens up some little gates. If enough positive particles rush in and hit a certain threshold, it triggers an all-or-nothing chain reaction, an electrical pulse that zips down the cell to pass the message along.
So, from some chemical gunk at the bottom of a prehistoric ocean, to the intricate coiling of DNA, to the electrical spark of a single thought in your own brain, the entire epic story of life is written inside you. It's a code made of just 4 letters. The only real question left is, what will you do with it?